You're listening to BFM 89.9, the business station.
Good afternoon, it's the Bigger Picture and it's Mira Sivisudi. It is a sadly common sight in Malaysia to walk past a beggar or two and to see them suffering from a terribly swollen leg or entire lower half. In fact, more than 1.3 billion people in 72 countries worldwide are threatened by the disease that causes this lymphatic filariasis, commonly known as elephantiasis. Now, Professor Emeritus Dato Dr. C.P. Ramachandran is a renowned researcher in this field. He served as former chief of filariasis of research and control at WHO in Geneva, and he's here to share his experience and his thoughts with me. Now, Professor, there are many types of tropical diseases in the world, and filariasis is just one of them. Could you shed more light on tropical diseases?
Thank you, Mira, for inviting me. Perhaps I'll start off by saying that the desire for a healthier and better world in which we live our lives and raise our children is common to all people and all generations. As we enter the 21st century, our past achievements and technological advances makes us more optimistic about the future than perhaps at any stage in recent history. However, infectious tropical diseases are still the world's biggest killers of children and young adults. For those living in developing countries among the poorest of the poor, no matter what their age, the risk of death and disability has always been many times higher than those living in the developed world. If I may say so, over 500 million people on earth, that is one living person in 10, suffer from one or more of the major infectious tropical diseases. Now, recently, WHO, after many years, I think the year 2005, decided to group these tropical diseases and call it neglected tropical diseases. They consist of about 13 major disabling conditions that are among the most common chronic infections in the world's poorest people. I'm talking about diseases of poverty because this is what the Western world, the rich world, has forgotten, that there are people living in various parts of the world who suffer from these diseases which can be easily controlled and cured, but yet they don't have the resources to do it. And many years ago, in the year 2000, the Millennium Declaration adopted by the United Nations, by the world leaders, pledged to eliminate these diseases, including poverty, hunger, and so on. And these 8 Millennium Development Goals are still the guiding principles of the UN in trying to help the third world countries, the poorer countries. And among them are the neglected tropical diseases, which includes, I won't mention all the names of the diseases, but lymphatic filariasis is one of them.
I mean, the more common ones are also leprosy.
And we have soil transmitted helminths, we have schistosomiasis, Chagas disease, trypanosomiasis, onchocerciasis, and what have you. A large portion of these diseases are still a major threat to children in African region, but so also in Asia Pacific.
Which ones would be do we still have in Malaysia?
Asia.
In Malaysia?
Malaysia, we are very lucky. Our public health program has been very good. In fact, when I was in charge of the filariasis control at the IMR many years ago, we managed to almost bring down the infection rates in the communities to very low levels. So today, Malaysia, because of our good public health and sanitation and good water supply and so on, we have brought down most of the tropical diseases to a very low level. And although I would say that it's not been totally eliminated, we still have some pockets in Sabah and Sarawak which are still having infection. But in general, our quality of and health standards are very high relative to other countries in the region.
Right. So you mentioned it's almost always related to poverty and, the underprivileged. Why is that, Professor?
Main problem is that these parasitic, you get infection, either it's a virus, bacteria, parasite, or fungi. And most of these infectious agents thrive in an environment where there is the quality of the environment in terms of water supply, sanitation, environment, housing, these are all poor, and the contact from person to person. And also many of these tropical diseases are transmitted by insects, particularly mosquitoes. Mosquitoes transmit dengue, they transmit filariasis, they transmit chikungunya, they transmit Japanese encephalitis, and so on and so forth. And so you don't get that situation in the Western countries where the temperature is not favorable for mosquitoes to thrive. So essentially, mosquito-borne diseases are confined by and large to the tropical zones of the world, in Latin America, in Africa, and Asia Pacific. And lymphatic filariasis is one of the most debilitating and disfiguring disease that does not kill you, but it really makes you feel very sick, and you become you're ostracized in the community because of the disfigurement, just like leprosy, and you go through life in a very difficult situation. It was estimated in the year 2000 that there are something like 120 million people in the world who have this infection, and in something like in 83 countries in the world. And it was considered as one of the major public health problems. And I was lucky in that sense because I became the chief of filariasis research and control when I first joined WHO, and I had an opportunity to do something at the global level in terms of, we've spent 18 years doing R&D, looking at new intervention measures, new therapeutic approaches, new diagnostic technology, and came up in 1994 at a meeting in USM Penang, my own university, where I brought in nearly 100 researchers together, and we put a strategic plan together because we had by the time invented or discovered new tools to combat the disease. And that started by WHO in the year 2000, the global program for elimination of lymphatic filariasis, which is at the moment ongoing in 52 of the 83 countries.
Brilliant. And what got you interested in lymphatic filariasis of all things, Professor?
Good question. Well, let me go back a little bit. During the Japanese occupation of Malaya, I was a young boy, and my father was teaching in St. John's School, and I was a student there as well in St. John's. But unfortunately, the war broke out, and the Japanese decided to take young boys to build the death railway in Burma, Myanmar. So we stopped school. Most of us stopped school, and so my father also couldn't teach anymore. So the only alternate was to get a cow. So my job was to graze the cow every day. I was living in Perak Road, Penang Road area in KL. And I enjoyed it, but there are times when the cow, being the natural thing, my father will have to take it to get it mated and so on.
Right.
And so once we went to Rawang, and there I saw, while walking with my dad with a cow, few people with big legs, Elephantiasis. And I asked my dad, what is it? And he said, oh, this is a disease which you get. He didn't know exactly from where. So that was my first exposure to filariasis. Then I went to India immediately after the war to study after my schooling, and I went to Madras Christian College in Tambram, which is a suburb of Chennai. My God, there were plenty of filariasis all over the place. People walking with legs, big arms. So that it was a very disfiguring disease. And I wanted to do medicine anyway. So my interest then took me to that level of infectious diseases. And my first thesis when I went as a student to London School of Tropical Medicine was on filariasis. That was in 1958. 50 years ago. I'm still working on it.
Well done. Can I tell everybody how old you are? Because I am really impressed.
Okay.
You're 75.
Yeah.
Excellent work, Professor. Do we know what causes filariasis?
Yeah, filariasis is caused by a parasitic worm called Filaria. It lives in your lymphatic tissues in your body. That means in your body you have the lymphatic system, and these parasites live inside the lymphatic canals or channels or lymph gland, where the male and female worms live happily, I think. And
let's hope.
They mate and they produce young ones called microfilariae.
Right.
The adults are known as filarial worms, the young ones are known as microfilariae. These microfilariae, through the lymphatic system, get into your blood circulation, and they circulate in your blood all the time, some more at night than during the day. They are picked up by mosquitoes, various species of mosquitoes, Anopheles, Aedes, Mansonia, what have you. And in the mosquito, these young larvae develop and become infective. In other words, it takes about 10 days. The parasites inside the mosquitoes, female mosquitoes take a blood male for the egg laying. So in the process, these parasites get into the mosquito, where they develop over a period of 10 days, become infectious or infective. When the same mosquito bites another person, it transmits this larvae into the new person, where then it develops in that person over a period of 2 to 3 months, become adult worm, and the life cycle goes on. That is the basis.
So the mosquito is the host?
The mosquito is the vector for transmitting. If you don't have mosquitoes, you don't get the disease.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. And, we have often see people with swelling of the legs, as you said, some of the arms, some of the genitalia, and even blindness are truly extreme. Now, does the disease follow a specific trajectory, or does it vary from person to person? Why is it some people have swollen legs and some people have swollen arms? Very
good question. I don't think nobody has so far answered that, because there is certain amount of genetic susceptibility, but that's not really been proved. But the parasites normally, any parasite, want to live with you happily. It doesn't want to cause damage to you, because its own survival then becomes a threat. Mm-hmm. So most parasites try to live in harmonious situation with the host, in this case man. But not everybody who gets infected with filarial worms need necessarily get lymphedema or hydrocele or elephantiasis. Not everybody.
So elephantiasis is a form of lymphatic filariasis?
That's right. It is the final stage of lymphatic obstruction.
So there are other stages?
Yeah, early stages and so on. But not everybody will come down with the most severe form. We don't know why. But a lot of people are what we call asymptomatic. But now we know they're not truly asymptomatic, because there is hidden damage in their lymphatic system and renal damage as well. But generally, out of every 100 people infected, maybe about 20-25% will get the inflammation or the swellings or hydrocele in men, or other signs and symptoms of elephantiasis.
That's a high percentage.
Yeah, it is. And so in the global level, we are talking about something like 50 billion people over clinical disease, and the others being just having the parasites in their blood, and they are capable of transmitting it through the mosquitoes.
You've got me scared now. We've got mosquitoes everywhere. Professor, how do we know whether a mosquito is being the vector for the filariasis?
Well, I think the Institute for Medical Research here in Kuala Lumpur, the pioneers who did most of the work on what mosquitoes transmit filariasis, among other things like malaria and so on. And we have a very clear knowledge now that the Malaysian parasites, Brugia malayi, is transmitted by Mansonia mosquitoes, which are essentially a rural mosquito in the rural areas of Kelantan, Pahang, Perak, and so on. Whereas the urban filariasis, which is found mostly in India, Sri Lanka, and other parts of the world, is transmitted by a brownish mosquito known as Culex. We have it here, but fortunately, we don't have the parasite, Wuchereria bancrota, which is the other one which transmits. So we are lucky in that sense, Our rural areas are being developed very rapidly. There's a lot of socio-economic development going on in all over the country. So the number of Mansonia breeding parts have come down. As a consequence, the transmission of Brugia malayi in Malaysian context has also dropped. So we are lucky in that sense. But if you go to Indonesia, there's plenty of it there.
Right. How many of them actually need to so-called bite you for it to transmit the parasite?
Yeah, well, it's simple. I mean, if you live in a rural environment, the mosquitoes are there, whether it's Anopheles or Mansonia, what have you. And as I said, the female mosquitoes take a blood meal to propagate their own, they need the blood meal to lay eggs. Now, generally, they bite animals. They bite goats, the sheep, chicken, what have you. But in the absence of the animal, they'll bite humans. And some of them particularly like human blood, unlike animal blood. But still, they bite humans whenever the opportunity arises. So you're exposed to it. You don't sleep under mosquito net every day.
No, we don't.
And it's very hot in the humid environment. So in the rural areas, people just sleep under the, nowadays maybe under a fan. But so the mosquitoes bite, and if you are an infected person, they take the infection from you, and the mosquito pass it on to another person. So these infections occur in cluster, in kampongs, in villages. At one time in Kelantan, Pahang, it was very, very rampant. Mm-hmm. But today, because of development, because of the control programs we have instituted through the Ministry of Health, we have reached a level of almost elimination.
Coming up, we'll find out more about lymphatic filariasis. If you have a question for Dato Dr. C.P. Ramachandran, do text 016-2019,000 or tweet BFM Radio.
You're listening to BFM 89.9, the business station.
Good afternoon. It's The Bigger Picture, and it's Meera Sivasudi. Professor Emeritus Dato Dr. C.P. Ramachandran is with me. We're discussing lymphatic filariasis. He's from Akademi Sains, Malaysia, as well as a former chief of filariasis research and control at WA2 in Geneva. Now, Professor, you mentioned that, Malaysia has put in place a lot of control measures, and hence, this whole filariasis disease is under control. What did you do? What sort of controls did you put in place?
In the early days, in the 1950s and 60s, when Malaysia started the National Control Program for Filariasis, we only had one drug. It's called DEC, or diethylcarbamazine. And luckily, our British scientists who were working here made the right decision, that they decided that individually going and treating people infected becomes very laborious and time-consuming. So they decided that every village which is considered an infected village, everybody gets treated. Children, males, females, adults, everybody. So the drug was given as a mass drug administration to all in the village. That strategy worked very well, because what we were trying to do then was to reduce infections in the community, so that mosquitoes will not have a chance to pick up the infection from any one person. And this program, one of the oldest in the world, Malaysian program for filariasis control, has been going on till late 1950s until a few years ago. Mm-hmm. So by giving the drug every year to the communities over a period of time, we reduced infection and we interrupted transmission. There are no more clinical disease found in Malaysia today. We may still find a few old cases, but no new cases in children. Peninsular Malaysia is almost free. As I said, we have a small pocket in Sabah and Sarawak, which soon should be eliminated. But the rest of the world, it's a different story. They started late, and there are still many, many countries in the world. It's got very high prevalence of filariasis, high disfigurement among the communities, and so on and so forth. That's why when I went to WHO, we said we got to do something. And our strategy was to find better ways of curing the infection in the early stage. And diethylcarbamazine, or DEC, was a good drug, but it did have some adverse side effects occasionally. So what we did was, after spending a lot of time and effort through various research laboratories in the world, we came up with 2 drugs which are effective. One was a veterinary drug called ivermectin. The other one was again a parasitic drug called albendazole. And these 2 drugs in combination did a better job than a single drug.
Right.
So the combination drug therapy is what we are doing now globally. In this part of the world, Asia Pacific, we use albendazole along with diethylcarbamazine, DEC. In the African region, we use ivermectin with albendazole, because in Africa we have another parasite called onchocerca which causes blindness. Unfortunately, you cannot use diethylcarbamazine there because it gives you violent reaction. So these are the 2 drugs which we are using globally, and luckily for us at the WHO level and the national level, we were able, while I was in WHO, to negotiate with 2 big pharmaceutical giants, Merck and Company and GlaxoSmithKline, and we convinced them that we need these drugs at a lowest price to the global community. You know what pharmaceutical companies are, they're very much profit oriented, and they said, how can we can't afford to sell it to you at a lower price. The alternate is to give it free. So until today, both these pharmaceutical companies are giving all the drugs free to any country that needs it, as long as you need it. That is the first breakthrough we have had in the paradigm shift from sort of a public-private partnership with pharmaceutical industry. And that was a major breakthrough for WHO. And today, other pharmaceutical companies are coming forward, donating their drugs. So both SmithKline, GlaxoSmithKline and Merck showed the way towards helping the poorer countries in giving the drug free of charge.
Is it a vaccine? Or
no, it's a drug.
Also mentioned it was a veterinary drug.
Yeah.
Is it meant for animals then?
It was used before in animals for various parasitic infections, ectoparasite. We tried the drug in humans and it worked beautifully as a microfilariasis, in other words, killing the young ones in the bloodstream. So we have a combination of 2 drugs now which is used globally.
Fantastic. We have a question from a listener via text message. Dr. Rama, I have a friend who has elephantiasis. Does this mean all those around him are at risk?
It depends what stage of the infection he or she is. If he's already developed elephantiasis and chronic elephantiasis, then no. Because by the time you get chronic elephantiasis, the young ones all would have been dead in the bloodstream.
The parasite.
So they are not threat to the community unless, it's very early stages.
What are the symptoms? What are the symptoms of early
stages? The symptoms
stages?
are, well, most of the time you won't know you have an infection unless you go for a blood examination.
And what are you checking for?
You're looking for the parasites in the bloodstream. You take a blood, you stain it and you look for it under the microscope. At that stage you probably don't have any symptoms, but you can cure it at that stage, and that is very important. That's why the diagnosis of filariasis is very important in the early stages. But once you pass that stage, you get inflammation or swellings of your limbs or swellings of your other parts of the body, and that stage also to some extent is curable if you give intensive treatment with these drugs I mentioned. But once you pass that stage, your tissues become fibrotic, hard, then there's nothing you can do. But at that stage, you are not infectious anymore. But you would suffer from it on your own.
Okay. So when you say Peninsular Malaysia is relatively free, so it's something that we don't really have to worry about.
We don't have to worry anymore.
Sure. I was reading that under the London Declaration, 5 deadly tropical diseases, and elephantiasis is one of them, could be conquered by the end of the decade. It's a pledge by 13 global drug companies together with Microsoft billionaire Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they're pumping in like $363 million over 5 years. Now, Britain's Department for International Development will contribute £195 million, and the US government will throw in $89 million. Will this help? How far will this go, in your opinion?
We are already, our goal is to eliminate the infection by the year 2020. We started the program, the Global Elimination Program, year 2000 through a WHO resolution. And we are very happy that Melinda Gates Foundation has helped us. We are very happy that the U.S. Department, USAID has helped us, yes. U.S. government, the Bush administration, and more recently the Obama administration has pledged money. The DFID English group, the Ministry of Health, has pledged again lots of money. And the European Union, the European Parliament, EU, has also pledged funding. So, and also with the free drug donation from both SmithKline and Merck, we are quite already halfway through the elimination strategy. From 120 million people infected, our estimate now is that we have reduced the numbers to 50 million.
So 50% down, 50%
almost,
to go.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we are, I'm optimistic that we will achieve the goal. You see, we are not in a program to eradicate the last parasite. What we are trying to do is to bring down infection to such a low level that it is not anymore a public health problem or the clinical disease being brought down. So we are very fortunate that we are getting resources from many of the countries to support the program at the global level.
Right. You're working more on a macro level, i.e.
Yeah.
you're trying to eradicate this tropical disease. But for someone who has elephantiasis, how do they deal with it, Dr. Rama?
Well, if you have elephantiasis, you get what is known as fever now and then. You get acute inflammation of lymph nodes, your inguinal glands, your what is known as lymphangitis or lymphadenitis. It's very painful. And these are caused actually not so much by the parasites per se, but by secondary bacterial infection. And what happens is most of the people in the rural areas, they walk around barefooted. And if you already have an lymphedema or swellings in your leg, and you have a lesion or a wound which appears in your foot or between the toes, bacteria invade. And bacteria then gets into your bloodstream. And a lot of the infection is exaggerated through the bacterial infection. So what then can one do? Yes, you can keep your legs, your hands clean. Wash it with soap and water regularly, twice a day. Don't get any infection. And then occasionally use some antibiotics, both topical and systemic, and get rid of the bacteria. By doing so, you can prevent getting inflammation, swellings, you can prevent fevers and acute episodes of adenitis. And that itself is very relieving, because many people, once they get the acute episode, they can't work. But now we have told the people all over the world, by doing this simple procedures, you can prevent your bad days when you get pain and joint pain and so on. That is one thing. In children, you did pick up the infection very early in their lives, 10, 15 years. Give them doses of this drug, you can completely cure them at that stage. And even in adult, if it's not too late, by taking the drug properly, you can stop the progression of filariasis, the progression of elephantiasis. But once you reach the other stage, the chronic stage, where the tissues have become hard, there's much less we can do. But thank God that today we have such cases are very few in numbers. What we are doing is to prevent the infection from progressing further in children or curing them, and same with the adult. If you look at the global program figures today, we have something like prevented a few million cases occurring in children since the last 10 years. I think the exact figure being 8.7 million newborn children have been prevented from getting the infection, and something like 6.6 million cases of hydrocele and 4.1 million cases of lymphedema and subclinical disease have been prevented. So these are big numbers, and I think we are optimistic in the next 10 years, with the amount of resources that be pledged, we should be able to bring down clinical disease to very low levels.
50% down, another 50% to go.
Hopefully.
What do you really need to eliminate that 50%? You've got the funding.
We have to bring down infection rates in communities. Each community below 1%.
How do you plan to do that? What is the
What we
what are
do
the
is
obstacles?
the strategy the global program is following is we give the drug, combination drug, once a year to everyone in the community over a period of 5 to 6 years, thus bringing down the prevalence rate of infection in the communities to below 1%. The magic number 1% is what we learned from experience in China and Korea and other countries. Once you bring down the infection to so low level through mass drug administration, transmission is interrupted. That means mosquitoes, even if they bite you, they will not be able to pick up the infection because it's so low. And then they'll automatically transmission will be interrupted. Already Sri Lanka has reached that stage. India is going towards it. China declared itself free 4 years ago. Korea last year declared it free. And we are now going into stages in other Pacific island countries where each of them are being certified as free of filariasis. Hopefully, Africa, which is a big problem, many of the countries will follow, because in Africa there are still a few countries that needs resources to help them. So our philosophy, or rather our strategy, is to bring down infection by mass drug administration to all people in the village over 5-6 years, and thus reducing transmission.
Thank you very much for all the good work that you've done, and we wish you all the best, Professor. Professor Emeritus Dato Dr. C.B. Ramachandran of Akademi Sains Malaysia, also former Chief of Filariasis Research and Control from the World Health Organization, Geneva, talking to us about elephantiasis or lymphatic filariasis on the Bigger Picture, BFM 89.9.
BFM 89.9, the business station.